give a talk in my hometown. I was born and raised in Seattle, went to Ballard High School. And on Saturday, we had a new grandson in the family, born at Ballard Swedish Hospital, where I was born. So kind of come full circle. Thank you. When I was 18, I wanted to travel the world, and I went to Hawaii. It was my first stop. And 24 years later, I moved back to Seattle. Didn't go anywhere. But when I was 22, I really wanted to spend my Saturday mornings boogie boarding. I lived a block from Kailua Beach, so it seemed like a reasonable thing to do. But I didn't have a washing machine. And so I spent my Saturday mornings packing these two guys in a 1976 Volkswagen Rabbit and heading off to the laundromat. So guess what I bought when I was 23? I bought a washing machine. It was one of the highlights of my life at that point because it allowed me to do a heap of household chores and other work while the children took naps. And occasionally we got to go boogie boarding. But the love affair with my washing machine didn't last very long. I think really just for a few weeks, because it didn't take very long before, now that I had that out of the way, now I could do a whole bunch of other stuff. And I decided to go back to school, and that took a lot of time and consumed a lot of energy, kept me really busy. And after finishing university, I went back to work full time. So then I really didn't have time to clean house. So what did I do? Can you guys hear me okay back there? Just checking. So I asked the babysitter to cook dinner 2 nights a week, and I got help cleaning house, and I bought a dishwasher, and I thought surely now after having all this help I'd have more time to do what I wanted to do, but that was a fallacy. And when I first saw Parkinson's law, I kind of wondered if that was what the issue was, that things were just taking as long as they would based on the amount of time I had. And I think that probably was true, maybe a lot of the time, but I don't know if I think that's true all the time. Because I think that what's really happening is that the faster that we can get things done, the more demand for getting things done faster. Right? So I think sometimes it doesn't matter how fast we're getting things done. There's just always more demand. So this is my hypothesis, that the demand's just going to increase proportionately to the amount of time or the capacity that we have to do the work. Therefore, the real question is, of all these things in our backlog, what should we do next? I think that's the real question. How do we prioritize this onslaught of work that's headed our way? And I find that if the answer becomes do all the things, then that is more harmful than good. Because the more we try to do multiple things at the same time, the longer things take, the more context switching we have, and the more things get delayed. And I think that's particularly true for teams that handle a lot of uncertainty, especially for operations teams, where you have a high demand with a lot of variability, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of different types of demand, from production outages to maintenance to product development. Context switching is very expensive. I wasn't surprised to see the results here, because every single workshop that I teach I do a lot of Kanban for DevOps and IT Ops workshops. Very close to the top of the list of items where teams are listing out their sources of frustration is context switching and conflicting priorities. This survey was done a couple weeks ago at a webinar across 55 countries, and yeah, you could see they could choose multiple options. That's why it adds up to over 100% there. But quality's going down. I just want to call your attention to declining job satisfaction and how work takes too long. 59% declining job satisfaction. We're seeing that to be a huge problem. I think it's always been a problem, but now it's more pronounced, and it's getting recognition and acknowledgement that people are not happy, trying to do the best that they can to build better products, and still not feeling good about their work. Poll number 2. What's the main cause of conflicting priorities for your team? Answer came back at 79% working on multiple projects. So I found it interesting that it wasn't unrealistic project timelines. That was only 5%. Like if that was the only project we had to work on, we could get that done, no problem. But we've got these 5 or 10 or 20 other projects that we're supposed to get done at the same time. And because of that conflict and priorities, that's what's taken so long. And I wonder if this is contributing to the burnout rate that we're seeing here. Agile Squirrel tweeting about the problem with burn, and any energy that we have left over is spent trying to conceal the burnout. So it's a real area of concern. Job satisfaction came up in Puppet Lab's 2014 DevOps report as being the #1 predictor of organizational performance. Patrick Lencioni has a book out called The Advantage, and he talks about how organizational health is going to really trump everything else in business in the future. And he goes on to define organizational health being the ability for companies to improve performance, job satisfaction, cooperation and trust, and then tolerance for experimentation. Right? And all of that, we need aligned teams. And so my take on DevOps is all about organizational health, particularly between teams that are overloaded with too much work to do, who don't necessarily have the trust and cooperation of decisions from people that get made upstream that impact them. I think that there's many definitions of DevOps out there. If you quick Google search tends to reveal more I think blog posts and articles about what DevOps isn't than what DevOps is. You see all the top 10 myths of DevOps. If you're doing X, you're not doing DevOps. If you've got DevOps in your title, you're doing it wrong. But I would like to just sort of argue that DevOps it's emerging, right? It's an emergent thing, and that people are just trying to do the right thing in most cases. And if somebody's got DevOps in their job title, gonna be devil's advocate with Jeffrey here, maybe they're just, at least they got the word that it's something maybe we ought to try, and they're just trying to move in the right direction. I think the goal is to remove the us-them in the organization, right? Because work is flowing to be delivered across these functions. And oftentimes teams are just mutually unaware of the critical information from other teams that's needed. So it's about the performance and cooperation across the whole organization, from business, design, development, ops. How can we deliver that fast and keep our job satisfaction high and build trust and cooperation? Because if teams are ignoring each other because they're trying to get their work done, then we don't have cooperation. So hence the need to limit WIP. With Kanban, you'll hear that, limit your WIP, work in progress, WIP. If you can get everything done that you've got on your plate, then you don't need Kanban, you don't need to limit your WIP. But that's usually not the case. Usually we're overloaded. We've got, the biggest complaints I hear is we have no visibility, things take too long, and oh, by the way, we needed this yesterday. Right? So people being blindsided and unaware of work headed their way, or if they did have sufficient time to understand what the request was, they could anticipate the need, right? You could set up monitoring in plenty of time before that release went out. So limiting WIP is one of the more challenging things to do. I struggle with it, and I go around teaching Kanban. I think everybody struggles with it, and people will always ask, "How do we get started?" Because how do we get buy-in? Rather, how do we get buy-in to limit our WIP? And then I ask, why do we take on more work than we have capacity to do? Anybody want to answer that? I usually get 5 things back. One, go ahead.
Well, I think sometimes you want, and I'm taking this from someone that passes on more work than people do, I guess. You want to ensure that they've got stuff to work on. So normally, if you're working on just one project, you'll have great swaths of dead time through that project while other things are happening that you're waiting for. And so, while you may not want someone to work on 10 projects in parallel, it's quite good for them to have a couple that they can flip between, so that you get a good bang for your buck.
How many people here are working on one project?
I prefer to work on one project at a time. I prefer to work on long overtime, 18 hours a day. Get the thing done, then move on to the next thing.
Feels good. Did you see the article in Fast Company? Came out, did a study on the neurological, it's the serotonin hormone that gets released when we finish work, when we say done. So we get high off of finishing stuff. Right? Serotonin gets released. How many of you are working on like more than 5 projects at a time? Yeah, okay. So that's the first example I want to show you. Personally, I think the best way to try and get buy-in, I was going to explain that, like the 5 things I get. Number 1, people don't want to be the person to let the team down. So they'll say yes, regardless. 2, we say yes to people we like. Right? It's harder to say no to somebody that we like. 3, fear of public humiliation. Right? And I see this a lot. People just worried about being publicly humiliated, called out at a stand-up or an ops review or something for not having finished work. And then 4 would be people pleasers.
What about like wanting the world to be perfect? I mean, that's why I always take more stuff on. Just because it's like, oh, we should do that. That would be more perfect.
Yeah, that comes up as that comes up as quite a topic at some organizations. Where's the balance between it's good enough, let's get it up, like within the lean startup, and we'll just pivot or improve it later on and do iterations, versus no, we need this thing to be perfect before it gets released.
Well, not necessarily that, but just like, there's always some way to improve. It doesn't have to be perfect before you release it, but there's a bazillion things we can do to make what we're doing better.
Yeah.
So I would say what you're describing is just another aspect of not being able to say no or always saying yes.
Yeah, I mean, essentially that, yeah. But it's a desire to live in a place where, it all is beautiful.
Yeah, like that your house is never done until you sell it. You're never done fixing your house until you sell it.
And the flip side of that, I think, is understanding the incremental value of incremental work.
Yeah.
Perfection isn't the goal of any business. Because frankly, the best way I can manage uptime on a server is to unplug it from the internet and don't let anybody use it. And that thing will never call me in the middle of the night, it just won't fill up. Great. But it doesn't add any value to the organization. And so I think that one of the areas, and I think this ties into your point around visibility, is understanding how the value that you're generating impacts the organization, so that you understand, is this gilding the lily type of perfection? Is this, taking the Rembrandt and putting it in a nicer frame when it's a frickin' Rembrandt? Or is this, actually really important because the eyes are crooked, and it's not Picasso, so.
I'll at the end, I'll come back and give you an option to deal with that. The fifth item for why we tend to take on more work than we have capacity to do is that we just simply don't know how big of an animal it is, especially if it's complex. We don't clearly know everything when we're starting. Right? In a complicated or complex domain, we don't know cause and effect. It's unpredictable. There's no way we can plan a perfect picture or model out of that. So things inevitably take longer than we think. So how do we get buy-in to limit our WIP? How do we get sort of approval to say, no, I can't take on this thing right now? Or if you do want me to take on this thing, point to the thing you want me to take off on my list. What are we going to stop doing? And visibility helps a lot with that. So Taiichi Ono was the guy who brought Kanban to Toyota. And one of his famous quotes is, the goal of Kanban is to make troubles come to the surface. So really we're trying to bring visibility to what the problems are so we can start a conversation. So if we've got a Kanban board that looks like this, which is it's kind of a high-level portfolio board that's just listing all the projects. You can see we've got 5 projects there, and those are the states that the bits of these projects move through on their way to done. And you can see that project 2 is hog-cheesing all the people and the resources. And that's what's impact. Project 1 and project 3, got pushed down to delay. So on this board, what's the pain point? Conflicting projects is causing some work on other projects not to get done or to get delayed. So they created a delayed swim lane, and they're moving work into it that's been delayed because project 2 there's always like the pet project that gets more attention than the other projects. The idea here is to shine a light on where the pain points are, what the problems are. And in this case, the problems are some projects not getting the attention that they deserve and work getting delayed. And they take it a step further and they put a number in red down there, the number of days that those items haven't been touched, that they've been delayed. So it's really visible now. Right now you can stand around this board and have a conversation of what's going on. It's provoking a conversation that needs to be had. Everyone can see that work that in the delayed swim lane isn't getting done. It becomes obvious. We can't deny it anymore. It doesn't get swept up under the carpet.
Excuse me, just quick. The letters, I probably should have looked at it before I came. Do the letters mean something that's actually on the post-it notes? I'm trying to work out, I can't see a pattern.
Oh, the letters just identify a piece of work.
Like a reference?
Specific piece of work. This is just an illustration.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah,
That's okay.
so it's just, project 3 has 3 bits of work moving through there, B, E, and F, but D is delayed.
Yeah.
So you may say, this is relatively simple. We've got, it only has 5 projects. You may have 75 projects going on. How do we bring visibility to that? And I would say you find a big wall like Bernadette Dyro did. She works in the public sector for an organization that supports the Canadian government up in Toronto. And they have a kind of a war room, if you will, for just like a kind of an open space where this board goes from floor to ceiling, and it lists they use MMF's minimum marketable feature. Every row there is an MMF. And they can come into the room and see what's being blocked by what and how long work is taking. And it provokes conversations that need to be had. Making the pain visible is the most comprehensive way to demonstrate pain. And if you want to try something like this, but someone tells you that you can't, I would say try it anyway. So you may be saying, well, we do a lot of work besides projects or products. And this is what I see is pretty typical of a lot of operations teams. They're trying to keep production up. They got a lot of fires going on, a lot of sub ones, a lot of knock issues. And then they're still supporting projects. They've got maintenance work. Maintenance work are the green tickets on this board and the legends on the left. And so we're calling those CODB for cost of doing business. This is the upgrade your database and set up monitoring and make sure your servers aren't getting utilized at 100%, and all the maintaining products. And then there's an improvement swim lane. These are your own improvements that you want to do for automating and hiring or cross-training or whatever kind of improvements you want to make. And then there's all the unplanned work. These are the drive-bys and the pings. Hey, you got a minute? And it always takes a lot more than a minute. So this design, by the way, so I'm going to show you several designs. And the idea here is not to say that any of these is what you should do. I'm just providing some examples to give you an idea. Kanban is not meant to be prescriptive. There's no one board solution that works for everybody. It's very unique. It's based on the context and the problems that you want to shine a light on. Okay. So in this one, they're just trying to understand all the demand. Because if they're only planning for projects and maintenance and improvement, and they book out all their time for handling those three kinds of work, then what happens when a fire comes along? Or what happens when unplanned work comes along? If they're fully booked at 100% capacity utilization and an emergency comes along, that means now they have to drop some planned work and make somebody unhappy. So this is bringing visibility to all the work, all the demand, so we can understand what the big picture is and see where work is getting blocked, where work's not flowing. The numbers on the left here represent work in progress limits here. And I want to point out this one. This one's really cool. This one said, usually you'll see work in progress limits at the top of the column. Like you can have so many, the team can be working on so many things at a time. Or you can have 3 items per person on your team. But there's many ways to set work in progress limits. And this example here is just saying, we can have 2 improvements going on at any one time, anywhere on our board. Is there some kind of work that you wish you had more time to do, that you know you need to have more time to do? You could set a policy like this that says, we always get to have one of these kinds of animals in play at any time. And then those are the kinds of things that when an emergency comes around, you can temporarily set them aside to handle the emergency. That's what allows you to have slack in the system so that you're not utilized at 100% capacity utilization. All right, exercise for you to try tomorrow morning. Query your ticketing system or your tracking system, whatever you use. Query it to show you all the things that haven't moved in 30 days. See what comes back. Interesting exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah. If that number is really high, then that's a flag. That's a red flag. You've got too much WIP. The idea is that things are flowing smoothly through and they're not stuck waiting on other work. If something's stuck for a long time, we want to call attention to that. Maybe flag it as being blocked. Place I worked at, we started out high. We started at that number at 180 days. Show me stuff that hadn't been touched in 180 days. Because if we started at 30 days, it would have been over 100 things that have been too high to manage. So we started at 180 and brought it down to 150, and we just kept working our way down. So if you don't have anything on 30 days, maybe try 10 days. See what comes
So
out.
what was your strategy to bring it down? Or is this?
What was the strategy to bring it down?
Yes.
Oh, that's a whole nother talk. But the short answer is to identify where the bottleneck is, and then help remove unnecessary work off of that team's plate. And in this specific situation, their team board looked similar to this. They were supporting all of this kind of work. And so we took a few people, one DBA, one sysadmin, one network engineer, and a project manager, and actually pulled their work, became completing projects that were 90% done. And they didn't have to be on call, and they didn't have to support the troubleshooting, the live issues, or the knock issues. So because those items were taken off their plate, now they had more time to spend finishing projects, and they knocked out all these projects that had been 90% done. This is one example.
So they got all the high from finishing.
And they got a lot of high, and now people wanted to be on that team.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's what I'm seeing a lot of. I'm seeing projects being taken off of operations demand. Right, just removing like product development and projects off of operations. And then it becomes a little bit easier for teams to manage their workload and to allocate more capacity for emergencies and unplanned work. And teams are either being embedded in product development teams, or product development teams are actually being responsible for delivering, sustaining, supporting, and maintaining the product. Times are changing. Here's an example of a product development team board. And here we've added a swim lane on the bottom for support and maintenance. So now operations people are being, evolving to become part of this product development team. And now we can have a conversation of, why did they build the data model like that? Don't they realize it's going to impact our data storage architecture? Right? It's going to provoke these conversations that need to be had. If I expand this board out a little bit further, you can see it end to end, where work is coming in from product development. And we got, so all the requests, the backlog's not on the board, but this column is meant to be prioritized changes that need to be made, design, build, with both development and support and maintenance impacts identified. And then a feedback loop, is it good enough? Maybe we need to revise. Is it ready for release? Release, and then there's support on the board. A lot of times you'll just see a board and done is release. Right, but what about all this support? So in this design, this whole team is responsible for the support and maintenance. Right? They're not just throwing it over the wall to an ops team to support. I like to say that people just want to know what's headed their way. They want the ability to weigh in on decisions that get made that impact them. It's a natural thing to want to do. Just help. Can we be part of the team? So the intent here is to look at the whole picture from end to end, because autonomy without authority is a very messy business, and oftentimes I think operations folks end up in that situation where they're responsible and accountable for maintaining production, but then they don't have any say on what's coming into production. So so this is an ops board, and we're trying to bring visibility to work that gets put on hold and work that gets abandoned. I don't know, how many of you deal with abandoned work? You deal with abandoned work? See a few heads nodding.
I'll fix my head to that.
A lot of
Work that
abandoned.
gets partway done, and
Yeah.
then suddenly you change direction.
And usually that's invisible. We don't have visibility to it. But if it's a pain point for the team, or we're trying to shine a light on the pain here, we're making it visible. In other words, we spent all this effort working on that feature or that task, and then it was abandoned. So we're bringing visibility to the effort that was there. And when we do that, though, it sets expectation that maybe some of our work will be abandoned. Maybe we are doing lean startup and we're expecting that some of our work is experimental in nature and that it won't make it all the way out. Very different from thinking that all of our work is eventually going to make it to production. So we've got work running through the top lane here. So we're just flagging items that need attention, like production's out, database server utilized at 100%, and it's a blocker, it needs attention. So we've got different symbols there to identify that. We've got the different colors represent different work item types. So gray tickets represent maintenance. Yellow tickets are live issues. Usually you'll see hot pink or red tickets live issues, but I was reading that the reason that they changed fire trucks from red to yellow is because the human eye, when it sees bright yellow, it's a sharper, brighter color, and so for the brain it gets attention better. Monitoring is green and blue. The heck did we make blue here? We've got load balancing, database access, and requests. On the left-hand side, we've got sort of a legend here, what the icons mean and what some of the policies are here. Here the policy is cards unabandoned are rumored canceled or have made no progress in more than 15 days. But these policies are what you and your team come up with and decide what they should be. And when people cooperate, we need less rules, less meetings. Right? We don't have to have a rigid structure if we have more trust and cooperation, and we need less resources. So the idea here is to consider the impacts to other team members, whether they're downstream or upstream or across organization. This is a enterprise, really high-level portfolio board. This is from a very large automotive organization. And their pain was they were doing waterfall, and some of their projects were taking over a year to get out, huge, massive projects. And so those numbers circled in red are weeks, the number of weeks that those projects have been in play. And the behavior that they wanted to start getting, that they wanted to introduce, was to break down those projects into smaller chunks. So what they did was they said, out of all the hundreds of things in the backlog, we can have 4 things in the next column, and 2 of them get to be blue. And blue stood for what they call small bites. So it was something that was going to take less than 10 weeks to do. And it started introducing more, people would break down their work into smaller chunks and get the smaller chunks moving on the board. And eventually they hope that they're going to get rid of these great big huge year-long projects by inspiring motivating teams to break their work down into smaller bits.
Good question about that.
Yeah.
The number, you said it's the number of weeks it's been in place. The number of weeks it's been in that particular column? Or
No.
is it the total?
The total,
Okay.
yeah. So that's why you'll see at the end there, it's longer than in the beginning. And then too big lane here for items, they get so far and they just get stuck because it's too big. So calling attention out to them.
And just to confirm though, each post-it note is a separate project.
Yeah,
It's
on
not
this
separate.
board,
Okay.
each post-it is a project in itself.
That's it, so it's not moving along, they're separate individual ones.
Well, no, that as the project would move from the analysis phase to the design phase, you would pick up the sticky note and move it over one.
Yeah, exactly, so M and K are 2 completely different projects at 2 different
Right.
phases, yep. Yeah, cool,
Right.
that's okay.
So what all these workflows have in common, they all have too much stuff to do. There's just too much stuff going on, right? There's too much WIP. Customers are complaining things are taking too long. There's not enough transparency on the requests. So they're bringing visibility to the pain points and to try to shine a light on the work that's not flowing. They're all competing with each other. But the main thing here is let's provoke a conversation, right? And let's understand how to prioritize. Right? If we don't have a policy for prioritizing, then how do things get prioritized? Usually by political weight. Whoever shouts the loudest, whoever has the most political clout, right? Or who's ever best friends with the sysadmin, call them up. So there's a third kind of board. So I've showed you portfolio level boards and team boards for operations and for DevOps. But there's a third kind of board that I think is really useful, and it's a risks and issues board. And on it, individual teams can place a card on this board if there's something that's blocked or there's a risk or an issue. And this would be in a very public place, so you can see what you're competing with. So all three of those tickets, they think they're priority one. Right? Everybody, their own thing is a priority one, right? But if everything's a priority one, nothing is a priority one. So this forces the conversation of what's the highest priority. So this one you've got features failing in integration tests. We're not going to get our feature out on time. Priority one, we have to work on this. This one is, it's going to mean a data center delay. We're not going to get our data center out on time. Priority one. This one is unauthorized finance database access. It's a priority one. So 3 different teams have put their work up on a single public board that's used by the entire organization to prioritize. And the next column there is calculate cost of delay. So they're asking the question, what is the cost of delay if this item doesn't get delivered? We're not asking what is the business return on investment. Right? We're switching it around and saying, what's the cost of delay if this thing doesn't get out? And cost of delay isn't always economic. Right? If you're a nonprofit in a World Health Organization, cost of delay might be the number of lives saved. Cost of delay is, we often look at the economic financial value of it, and that's what this example is, but it doesn't have to be economic. And so from this one then, those teams have to calculate, and by the way, there's in this tool, these little eyes up here, I have policies in them, and this one, it has a link to how to calculate cost of delay. Jez Humble, Joy Malowski, and Barry O'Reilly have a new book out called Lean Enterprise, and they talk about calculating cost of delay. Very interesting. But it originates from a guy named Don Reinertson, and he wrote the Flow book, which is all about queuing theory and the basis for what Kanban is all about. See, most traditional project management methods use due dates and scheduling to manage workflow. But with Kanban, we're looking at queues and wait times and queuing theory to manage the flow. So it's a different mindset there. But fabulous concept here. And I'll show you a picture of the books in a little bit. So they have to calculate the cost of delay, and after doing that, financially, the daily 10K hit a day on financial database getting broken into extremely high. So that wins out on priority. And then the next step, if you need to escalate, there's a column for that. And then the last column is having a feedback loop there, or learning. We're calling it communicate learning. Here's Jez Humble's book, Lean Enterprise, and Don Reinertson's book on flow. Highly recommend you read those. Your bosses probably are.
Or read them and then leave them on your boss boss's desk.
Read them, leave on your boss's desk. Yeah, I like that.
I've read Lean Enterprise. I can say it is a wonderful book. If nothing else, it's got citations of so many other things you can look at if any one of the things they talk about is interesting.
Yeah. Good book. Back to job satisfaction, which I'm pretty passionate about right now. I came across this thing called the Kiwi dial. And so that's a kiwi bird. And then as a way to measure job satisfaction, you can put it up on the wall. Or you can measure anything. Here they've got business value backlog, but people can, you turn the beak, like if the beak gets turned over to terrible, then the bird is upside down, it's considered dead. And as a way to get employee feedback, F5 uses this. F5 Networks in Seattle uses this to get feedback from the teams.
Rules for flipping the switch, though.
Well, that's gonna, you have to set those. It's gonna depend on what you guys agree to. Any question? No? Okay. Anyway, I just bought two, $8.95 Naviset. I don't work for them, but I'm gonna bring some back to my organization. I think that'd be a very clever way to get some good feedback.
Problem is, on that one, each person that walks past will have a different opinion on a certain subject, and that keeps
Yeah, well, so
it.
it captures, like, I don't have it, I've just ordered it, but I think it captures,
Oh, the teams.
yeah.
Okay, gotcha. There's a formula behind
There's
it.
something
and then,
that captures
you don't
it.
get the negative one at the end that just
No.
flips it over.
Yeah.
Every day on his way out, he just flips it.
On your way out, excellent.
A short, prioritized list of things is a beautiful thing. And if I had known better when I was 22, I probably would have gone to the beach more instead of wasting a year of Saturdays at the laundromat. So I wanted to encourage you to think about cost of delay and using it in order to prioritize what really matters to your organization. Because otherwise it's just whoever yells the loudest or who's got the polished shoes, who's wearing the polished shoes in most places. Clear priorities, fewer interruptions. So that's all I've got, but I've got a lot of time to take Q&A if you've got. Yeah.
So on, especially on the risk board, when you have multiple big things that come up at kind of the same time or whatever, how long does it take for those items to move through that queue? Because I've seen where there might be multiple, like something that's a big item that a manager might ask for might be a really large fire that's happening very quickly. Where even minutes might count. So how cumbersome is the board as far as timing?
Yeah. So that question can be applied across a quite scale, but
Sure.
Is the transaction cost of creating the board and creating those tickets worth the value that we get out of it? And that's the open-ended question.
I think at some level you apply the elevator versus the stairs, right? The elevator in this building is a beautiful thing. It gets you to your floor, it gets you back down from your floor. If the building's on fire, don't use the elevator. And so you might have a similar kind of thing. It's like if you're at in the kind of state where this would be considered, this is something that we're going to go do retroactively potentially. I'll go ride the elevator once we're no longer hemorrhaging $2 million a minute.
Right.
And that's the kind of policies you just get to figure out for your organization.
Where the threshold is.
And also using, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, right, common sense.
Yeah.
Right.
The same question can be applied to when do we create a ticket or a card in our ticketing system or our workflow system. Are we going to create a ticket if it only takes 5 minutes to do? Well, probably not, but maybe there's some exceptions. Maybe that
there's 1,000 things that are taking 5 minutes, so we want to kind of track.
Exactly.
something,
If
post,
somebody's work, if that's what all they do all day is work on 5-minute fixes and none of that work is tracked, then all of their work is invisible. It's hard to manage invisible work.
Yeah.
Right. Or maybe there's a dependency, or maybe only one person knows how to do that thing, so we'll create a ticket to cross-train somebody else.
Well, I think the other part is you've got incident tickets that are the major ones run now, and you've got project issues or risks, don't you, as well, which may cost you more, but there's no impact maybe to your customers at this point in time. And I think the hard part is, or the part I've seen, it's kind of the people knowing a little or knowing a bit might be, you know, more dangerous than the person knowing a lot. And the analysis of when you get a risk or an issue to when it gets on board, I think that's the most important part, because a lazy written risk can put a project in its, you know, it can stop a project completely, and then you go back and analyse what that risk was and what the risk really meant to say, and you find there isn't an issue there or something. You know, there's a bit of a filter that I know slows everything down, but you know, one of the biggest things I've hated is risks and issue boards, where people can pretty much raise risks and issues as and when they need to. And the analysis, you know, if you're not going to put the effort in, say, to expand on that risk, don't put the risk down. It's kind of my...
Well, this thing, if it's in a very public place, and you have to stand at the board and justify the cost and what the risk is to your peers,
that's it.
It's a bit of a different meaning than just...
They've got to be ready to face the music if they put it.
Force them to put their name on it.
Well, put their name and their employee IDs. You can cross them off when you've read it through and worked it out. But yeah, I mean, it's just something that, you know, over the years.
Cross the employees off?
Yeah, just when you translate their risk and you're like, what are they talking about? You know, it's something that I have seen a lot. You know, with a risk that has been put there and has apparently been vetted, but hasn't had the right amount of effort put in.
Yeah.
And if it can be read in too many ways, that can stop a project. And
So Lonely Planet in Australia used to have a huge, overwhelming flood of requests from multiple teams, and every team, theirs was a priority one. So they set FIFO queuing policy in place, first come, first serve. But the problem with FIFO queuing, it might work for some work, but it doesn't work for everything, because what happens when you have an urgent or very high risk item come along? So they put a policy in place that said, bring your business case to our stand-up and present it.
Yeah.
So now they've got different business people coming to their stand-up, listening to them present their business case. Much different picture now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you get a better picture when.
Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
So you're just going to try and fill a little time.
You mentioned earlier there was a slide with you also about maintenance versus improvements.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen where the lack of being able to focus on improvements is causing the maintenance to be larger than it should be? And how does this force that conversation to happen where maybe they chose, maybe 8 out of these 9 maintenance projects are, I got to go physically update DNS.
Yeah.
And because of that, I never have time to go automate it.
Yeah.
And how does that conversation happen?
Yeah, because you can see how long updating DNS has been sitting here. And eventually, if we don't update DNS, it turns into one of these. So you can start to see the relationship. But these need to get created first, and then you show how long they've been delayed. It's not easy, right? But I think the first step is bringing visibility to it.
It's one of the reasons why when I've done stuff back in my consulting days, I would always start with a physical board, even if it was a little bit inconvenient, because I could hack it to whatever the need was. So we had a similar sort of thing, but it was based on, we had a serious, one client had a serious squeaky wheel problem, and we wanted to make that visible. So we started basically saying, anytime something gets delayed or something gets prioritized over other work because some manager or executive, made that decision and made you take the work that you were doing and stop doing something you'd already started. Difference between that and putting something at the top of the backlog because it's important, right? I said, put a red dot on it. Don't tell them no, because you're not empowered enough to tell them no. Put a red dot on it. And so we started gathering this, and over about a month, we started seeing that like 40% of our work was stuff that was interrupt driven. I'm like, great. Now we need to know where it's coming from. Put a red dot and their initials on it. And it stopped in 2 weeks. Like 2 weeks went by, and so this is a total of 6 weeks. We got some data. It was like, great. We now need to figure out where it's coming from, and it was coming from a couple of particular people that weren't being as good about their inter-team relationships, and the VP would walk basically past our Kanban board on the wall on a regular basis. And at one point he stops, he looks at it and goes, "Are these initials what I think they are?" I'm like, "Yeah." It's like, "Oh." And like at the end of that sprint, it was done. We didn't have that problem anymore. They dropped to about 5%, which is not bad, right?
Another option to that I've seen is a VP lane on the board. So the last minute requests that are coming in from the VP, who doesn't really realize the impact of the interruptions. Now we can see other work that gets delayed because these requests are coming in. Or if it's not coming from the VP, just random people are driving by people's desks. Because it's a lot harder for you to tell me no if I'm in your face saying, "Can you get this done?" Especially if you like me. So people will physically get out of their desks, if you're not remote anyway, and drive by people's desks to get work done. And in that situation, I've seen people say, "Hang on just a second, have a seat, let's create a ticket for that or a work item for that," and then say, "We are cross-training other team members to handle that kind of request. So I'm going to assign this to Joe, and will you please work with him, and I'm going to take myself out of the loop. Are you okay with that?" And that changed a lot of the drive-bys.
I have a question. So, you kind of talked about, having multiple projects, and if we have, we have people that are working on 4 or 5 projects at a time, and what's a good way to maybe surface sort of an individual's commitment across those projects and sort of like their overall whip, to make sure that you're not overtaxing them on things, and especially when, we'll get an RFP in and needs a response or something like that, that it's like, okay, now this goes through the queue, but you've got so many projects going on and maybe boards in different places and distributed teams.
Yeah. So it's kind of a big question. A couple ways to handle that is to have a system in place that captures the total amount of work no matter what project it's in. So some kind of tool that has connecting boards, or I don't know, maybe you have to write something, but some view of all your work, and then how long some of that work has been sitting idle. One organization I worked with in the beginning, people had 40 things assigned to them. 40 things. And for a number of reasons, right? Sometimes we like to pull what we want to do out of the backlog. We call that optimizing for fun. I want to work on these things. I'm going to pull them into my queue so nobody else gets them. But then they'll sit, because I have too much to do, so then they sit for a while. Or whether they're getting assigned out. But if just query your database, how long have these things been in this state, untouched or not moving? And if the flow is impacted, then you've got your data collected now. You've got your cycle time of how long these items are taking to get through. Oftentimes, so think about cycle time's the duration from when we pulled that work into here to when it got closed. And oftentimes, it's not because it took 10 days to implement. It probably took, like half a day to implement, if that, and then it sat there and waited for 3 days, or waited for another 10 days. It's the wait time that's the problem. The touch time is often only 2% of the whole duration of work that's flowing through your system. So we want to understand what the ratio is of touch time to wait time. And it's the wait time that we're trying to squeeze out. And the more things we have on our plate, the longer the wait time. And if people have a hard time understanding queuing theory, just show them a picture of a freeway that's maxed out at 100% utilization and the cars aren't moving. That's why you see all these curves. I don't have a picture one, but you see all these curves that at 80%, the number of items in the queue start going up exponentially. And that's why companies have that 20% creativity rule. 20% of your time you can work on whatever you want. But it's not so that we have time to be creative. If we're in a creative industry and we have to wait till Friday to be creative, then we're probably in the wrong job, right? We have that 20-80% rule so that we can have 20% slack in the system, so that we have time to handle the unpredictable, the unplanned work, the expedites, and the fires that come through. It's hard for an ambulance to get through on a freeway if it's completely a parking lot. And that's right out of Don Reinertson's book. I pull my work on queuing theory out of Don Reinertson's flow book.
There's another aspect to this is that some companies talk about you go to work for 8 hours, but you're not doing productive stuff for 8 hours. I mean, the fact of the case is we're not machines. And it's like between 4 to 6 hours of that day is really productive.
If that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's really, sometimes it's really hard to push back and get people to think realistically about how much.
It is. It's hard to say. It's hard to say no. It's hard to say no. And we're used to driving toward due dates. But does everything have to have a due date assigned to it? I would argue no. There's a few true due dates, right? Like we're having this compliance security check happening on this date. That's a real due date. But we've used, sorry, what's that?
PCI compliance?
Yeah. We tend to trade shows or the World Soccer Cup event. Those are real.
The only real deadlines in the world are generally external to an organization. Everything else, you know.
Most times people just want to know, when am I going to get it? Right? If I'm at the airport and the train is coming along again in 3 minutes, then it's okay if I miss it, because I know another one's coming along in 3 minutes. But if I'm at the bus stop here, it's going to be an hour before another bus comes, then that's when I want to know, that's when I want to try and control the exact time or date when it's going to be delivered.
Something that you said in the beginning, though, the demand, right?
What about the demand?
We work harder when we know that we have less time to finish something. We're more
We do.
efficient at it when we know that we have less time. So don't you want due dates? Don't you want to put the number down even if it's not grounded in reality?
Okay, so so this is a very, thank you for bringing that up. That's a very common point. Like, well, what's going to motivate us to finish it if we don't have a due date inspiring us? If this work, if every day this thing isn't moving, it's the team around you and people are going to say, what's going on with this?
So the increment, the counter that's sitting on it is going to start drawing eyes.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have peer pressure.
You're going to have a stand-up and you're going to say, this thing's blocked or it's been idle for 10 days. What's going on here? And so we're incentivized to increase flow. We're incentivized to look at flow efficiency over resource efficiency. So the difference there is with flow efficiency, we're looking at how long does it take us to get, sorry to use the word value, but whatever we're creating to our customers. We're optimizing for the customer. Resource efficiency is optimizing for the equipment and the people doing the work.
Should be secondary.
For example, well, it kind of depends on the industry, but if I, at the airport, if you wait for the blue shuttle, and then the blue shuttle's got to stop at every single place, and it's got to go around the airport because it's got to load up 12 people in the van and pack them in there before it goes off to your destination. That's optimized for resource efficiency. They're optimizing for the driver, and for the van, and for the gasoline. What does it do for the people who are riding the shuttle? It sucks, right? If I'd gotten an Uber or a taxi, I could have gotten to my destination much faster. That's optimizing for the customer. So in your organization, how are we optimizing? Are we optimizing for the employees or for, it's going to depend. If you're painting Corollas and your equipment, if you got blue in there, it'd probably make more sense to paint 100 blue cars than to swap out the paint or whatever you need to do multicolors. But in many instances, looking at flow efficiency is pretty interesting, and customers will like it too.
There's a bunch of research into batch sizing and what I found interesting in a lot of this is the amount of parallels between a factory floor and knowledge work. Because you think that they were two totally separate things. Hey, that machine can run 24/7. Like, really, can it? Because when you need to change from red paint to blue paint, not only do you have to change the canister, you have to clean the machine. So that's a limitation of the machine that causes downtime in order to cause you to, in order to be able to do what you want to do. So maybe you do things like Dominica said, optimizing your batch sizes for doing a bunch of blue cars all at once and then a bunch of red cars. Because it doesn't make sense to swap back, do one blue and then clean it, and then do one red and then clean it and then do one blue. But at the same time, we want to think of maximizing the efficiency of our resources being people, and for some reason we put in our minds that the gold standard is a machine that runs 24/7, and there's very few machines that do that.
But there's also a lot of times there are QA, even there's a QA on a factory line. The same thing, you're talking from knowledge, also having to do the same thing. So there's always that human element from a QA standpoint as well.
There's a study that was done in Sweden on the Swedish health system for cancer. And they have the traditional process, this for breast cancer, for women to find out if they have breast cancer. And so woman goes in and in the traditional way, she has to wait days to get the appointment for the ultrasound. I always have to go like this to think of the word ultrasound. And then, and then you have to get the appointment with the doctor, and then they have to do a tissue sample, and on and on and on. And in the traditional method, it took something crazy like 60 days for her to get her results back. And they have a new system specifically built for cancer patients where you go in, and the lead time on that is 3 days. So 60 days and 3 days is a huge difference in being treated for cancer, for survival rates in some cases. So there's an example of optimizing for the flow where we're looking at the results of the patient, right? Not necessarily the impact to the doctors or the equipment or who's setting up those appointments.
I'd like to just make a comment about the question about dates and setting the dates and using the dates to drive things. So at a place that I had worked, we had this very strange thing where from an external company that we were working with, we kept getting these dates. They kept saying there's these very specific dates that everything has to be done by. We didn't quite, like anyone who starts giving you a date on absolutely everything, you start kind of questioning the validity of those dates. Now you have no information about which date is really valid and which date isn't, so you stop believing any of them.
Yeah.
And we had a little bit of a dysfunction where we stopped believing almost anything that they told us about their deadlines. So we kind of went with that for a while. There was a problem then. It turned out that one of those dates really was not negotiable. And it was internally. They had things that they had to set up internally in order to deal with it, and so they had a very specific date, and we started getting problems from that. And at that point, we opened up the conversation with them, and we kind of pretty much went to them and said, not everything here is a real deadline, is it? And they said, no, we just needed to give you a date. And so we said, well, how about you tell us what are the real deadlines and what are the ones where it doesn't really matter too much? And then what we can do is as we're working, we're going to be working towards all the different things at once as we can. But if we start noticing that we're not going to make one of those real deadlines, we can make the right decision. We can actually start shifting people over and tackling the problems that we're having. And once we had that, suddenly they were really happy about that. And we were really happy about it as well, because now we had a much better understanding of what was really going on.
Now you've got trust and cooperation, where before there felt a need to set an arbitrary due date so they felt like they could get their stuff done.
Yeah. And we actually,
But when you set, if you've got a fully, if you've got like a Microsoft project plan, fully resource loaded with 1,000 different dates in there, and each one has a buffer on it, now it extends it so that it's unbelievable, right? You can't really believe that that's the due date, so you become suspicious.
Turns out there's lots of ways that you can set up a dependency graph like that. So one of the ones that I like is to push everything off to the very end. Okay, make everything, don't do anything up front that you don't have to. You're just going to be working on critical path things, all the important stuff. And when you get to the end, then you can fill everything out. There's only one thing wrong with that, and that is if anything slides, the whole thing's busted. So you can't just wait to the last second. That's procrastination. So you have to not procrastinate, but you do have to respect those kind of things. You can't start off doing everything all at once. Let's do all the easy stuff first. Well, then you create a whole bunch of requirements for all the stuff that's hard, and you can't get them done either. So you have to find out what's a critical path, respect that, plan your stuff that way, and when you get to the bottom of it, maybe half the stuff you can lift, put it in the middle somewhere, and don't worry about overloading your number of things that you can do in a certain time frame, because that time frame will just get a little longer in the middle.
Yeah, well, and you won't know everything up front, so you can't plan it perfect to begin with anyway. Yeah.
I think one of the biggest pressures I've seen for dates is when you've got a project that goes over a year. It goes over 2 financial years. It clips another one. And that's where you have a real problem, especially if you're working for a large public company, something that gives their results, especially every quarter, but really the year is the big one. You may have funding one year, you may not have any funding for that project the next year, no matter what you do. You could find you work yourself to the bone and get 3/4 of the way through the project. You hit December and that project's gone. It doesn't matter what's happened, doesn't matter how valuable it is. If there's no money in the pot next year and you can't get any allocation in that pot.
There's a woman by the name of Pat Reed who gave a talk at the Agile conference last year who is teaching people and business and financial leaders at large public organizations how to rearrange their financial budgeting to allow for a pool of money in smaller buckets to avoid some of those problems. And I think her talk is, I think it's public that you can get to. Pat Reed, she teaches at Berkeley and does a lot of work and training on the side.
there's actually an entire school of thought around that called Beyond Budgeting.
Beyond budgeting, yeah. Thank you.
I think it might be a talk about that.
Yeah.
So if you just Google Beyond Budgeting,
Yeah,
it'll come
no,
with all
no,
sorts of things.
Oh, is that Mary Poppendit?
No, I
That's
think
Pat
this
Reed?
came out of the accounting and finance world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mary Poppendit's talk, which is public, she did at FlowCon last year, talked about the, so what's my tip? Sorry, I'm running way over, but it's a fabulous talk. If you just Google FlowCon, it's Jess Humboldt's conference last year, it was in San Francisco, and Mary Poppendit does a talk on why we don't have capacity to do R&D anymore and why it's all about short-term benefit because our CEOs are being measured on shareholder short-term value. And this is removed our ability to spend time doing R&D, which is really hurting IT. And last comment is, I like to say we don't let our servers get to 100% capacity utilization. So why do we let our people? Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.